Chapter 5. Sleeping in the same room as Pinkie Pie and Applejack more or less precluded the possibility of sleeping in late. So the morning came far too early for Twilight Sparkle. Even having gone to sleep immediately after Celestia brought her to the castle, she felt as though she had barely slept at all, and was certainly not ready to face the day of dueling she had ahead of her. The room Celestia and Luna had put up the friends in looked as though it had been a guard quarters or barracks at some point in the past. The polished white stone of the walls and the floors were colorfully decorated, with multicolored garlands and beautiful tapestries on the walls and warm woven rugs on the floor, keeping the sensitive hoof away from the cold stone. 2 long rows of beds were lined up against the walls, and a cheerful fireplace crackled at the far end of the room. "Morning, Twi," came a familiar drawl from across the room. As far as Twilight could tell, Applejack had already been wide awake and was sitting stretched out across her bed, her hat still draped over a post at the headboard. The orange farm pony grinned over at Twilight. "Ready to go show some of them magicians what real magic looks like." With a groan, Twilight shoved her head underneath her pillow. "It's too early," she said, muffled by her mattress and pillow. "This must be what Spike feels like when he wakes up in the morning." A third, hyperactive and sugary voice piped up from the bed next to Applejack. "It's not too early," Pinkie said, also sounding up and raring to go. "I'm always up this early. Mr. Cake always says, early to bed, early to rise. And, I don't remember the rest of it, but it ends with ice cream." "Ice cream? Pinkie, I don't think it has anything to do with—" "Twilight!" Pinkie interrupted, speaking in a stage whisper that somehow was even louder than her normal voice. "You should keep it down. We don't want to be rude meanie ponies and wake anybody else up." Twilight groaned again and extracted her head from her pillow, then looked to the other beds. On the other side of the room, next to Pinkie Pie and Applejack, Rainbow Dash was lying sprawled across her bed, dead to the world. To Twilight's right, Rarity was curled up daintily under the covers, while in the next bed, Fluttershy chewed on her mane asleep. The only sign of Spike was a small round lump buried under the covers on the bed to Twilight's left. "Come on, every pony, up and at 'em," Applejack said softly as she got up. She flipped her hat onto her head before walking to the far end of the room and settling on the rug next to the fireplace, away from the sleepers. Pinkie Pie bounced out of her bed over to join Applejack, and after a moment, Twilight dragged herself out of her bed to join her 2 friends. "Anyway, Twilight, I was just going to say that me and the Cakes are up this early most days," Pinkie spoke as she warmed her front hooves by the fire. "We have to get up this early to start baking for the day at Sugar Cube Corner." "You mean the Cakes and I?" "Right, Pinkie?" Twilight asked, stifling a yawn. "What?" "You said me and the Cakes," Twilight said primly. "But you meant to say the Cakes and I." Pinkie blinked in confusion. "But Twilight, I work at Sugar Cube Corner, not you. You work at the library, remember?" "I don't think that's quite what she meant, darling," Applejack drawled. Pinkie giggled at her friends. "But the Cakes don't work at the library either, sillies. Twilight, you mean you and Spike. Oh." Pinkie's eyes lit up. "Maybe we should trade sometime. Spike could work at Sugar Cube Corner, and I could help at the library." Skeptical was insufficient to describe the look that crossed Twilight Sparkle's face. "You want to help at the library?" "Sure, 'cause then we could take a break and go to Sugar Cube Corner." Just then, a bright yellow Pegasus ambled up to her 3 friends, awkwardly attempting to pull a few strands of pink mane from her mouth as she walked. "Good morning, She made a spitting sound as she extracted the last of her mane. "One." "Fluttershy." Twilight greeted her friend exuberantly, grateful for the opportunity to escape Pinkie Pie's conversational vortex. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Oh, yes, I slept fine, thank you," came Fluttershy's typical soft response. "It was so nice of the princesses to let us stay here." "Oh, it was. I've always loved this part of the castle," Twilight said, stretching out over the rug on her side, keeping her delicate wings away from the fire. And it makes me feel better to have you guys all here with me. Fluttershy nodded, ruffling her feathers.
Oh, me too. It's so much fun having everyone together like this, and I'm so glad we can support you too, Twilight. You did so well yesterday, and it would be a shame if you were here all alone, worrying about the results.
Darn tootin', Applejack agreed vehemently, drawing a smile from Twilight and a small squeak from Fluttershy. Speaking of, she continued, we should get some breakfast and see if we can't find about them results. See who Twilight's gonna fight first. Shouldn't we wait for the others? Pinkie Pie asked. Or maybe we could wake them up. She began drawing a deep breath. Pinkie! Twilight hissed, leaving Pinkie Pie with puffed out cheeks and a quizzical look. Let them sleep. I know Spike won't be up for another hour, and even if I did make it to the latter matches, the first match won't be for hours. There's plenty of time.
And Rarity and Rainbow Dash both sleep in any day they don't have to go to work,
Fluttershy added. Pinkie Pie let out her breath with a gasp.
Okay.
The four friends quietly exited the room. Twilight began to lead the way down the familiar halls of Canterlot Castle. Oh, it's been so long since I've been down these halls like this, she said cheerfully. You know, many of these rooms, she gestured to the adjoining doors, have been unoccupied for many years. Like the quarters Luna put us up in, they're old military barracks. She carried on with her history lesson as the group walked down the old corridors, Fluttershy hanging on to every word, and Applejack followed disinterestedly while Pinkie Pie played with a paddleball set, and soon the group exited the castle through the side entrance. Brings us up to year 480. Oh, here we are, Twilight said cheerfully as the group walked into the castle doors. So, breakfast. Canterlot had no shortage of good places to eat, and so Twilight decided to visit one of her favorite cafes from when she lived in the castle town. A small, quiet place near the castle with the best daffodil and daisy sandwich ever, Pinkie Pie exclaimed as she devoured the aforementioned meal in a single bite.
Thank you, Twilight.
The four friends were sitting at a table under an awning outside the cafe, enjoying the chance to eat and relax before the day's events. Fluttershy nibbled on her dandelion salad more daintily.
Yes, thank you for bringing us here. It's all very tasty.
She smiled brightly at Twilight as she sipped her tea. Twilight was also smiling brightly and was about to respond when she noticed two unicorn fillies on the sidewalk whispering to each other and pointing to her in about the least subtle way imaginable. They were each wearing some tasteful, understated jewelry, and one had a thin shawl draped over her withers. Obvious locals, Twilight deduced. Can I help you? The two fillies jumped at having been caught. They looked at each other before advancing timidly.
Like, you're Twilight Sparkle, right?
The first asked nervously. Yes, Twilight responded slowly. Applejack glared suspiciously at the two fillies from across the table.
Oh, cool,
the young unicorn exclaimed, relief washing over her.
We weren't sure if it was really you.
The two promptly shrieked, causing Fluttershy to vanish under the table and begin bombarding Twilight.
You were so awesome yesterday. How'd you grow those wings? Are you seriously Celestia's personal student? Did Discord really turn you into a newt? What are you going to do when you win the cup? How did you beat Nightmare Moon?
The two fillies looked at each other and then looked back at Twilight and shouted in unison.
Is it true about you and Princess Luna?
The barrage was interrupted by Applejack slamming her hoof on the table. Now just hold on there a minute. What in tarnation is all this about? With a wince, Twilight set her hoof on top of Applejack's.
Easy there, AJ.
She then looked over the two young unicorns.
Please, girls, one question at a time.
One pawed awkwardly at the ground.
Sorry, Miss Sparkle,
she said in a small voice.
You were just really cool yesterday, and you're this big hero, and...
Yeah, her friend piped up.
Like, there's all these rumors going around about how you beat Nightmare Moon in Discord and, like, totally exterminated a dragon that was going to burn down Canterlot.
Pinkie blinked.
An extermination mission? Twilight, when did we do that?
With a sigh, Twilight held a hoof, holding off any more of the young fillies and Pinkie Pie's ramblings. Girls, First off, a lot of those rumors aren't true. I didn't do anything about the dragon, and it certainly wasn't going to burn down Canterlot. He was just snoring lots of smoke. She looked around for a moment, and under the table at Fluttershy, who smiled sheepishly and climbed back to the chair. Fluttershy is the one who convinced him he needed to sleep somewhere else.
It wasn't much, really. I just asked nicely.
Fluttershy mumbled, trailing off into an inaudible squeak. And as for Discord and Nightmare Moon, Twilight went on. I didn't beat them by myself at all. If it weren't for my friends standing there with me, I wouldn't have been able to do anything. It wasn't just me that beat them. It was the power of friendship. The two fillies looked at Twilight, not in disappointment exactly, but certainly confused. So, one of the fillies asked quietly, do you think you'll be able to beat Shahnaz this morning? Shahnaz? Twilight asked blankly. Like, yeah. Your first opponent today. It's on the schedule and everything. The other said in surprise. Oh, I don't know. I'll certainly do my best. Twilight smiled weakly. It was very nice meeting you two girls. The fillies brightened up suddenly. Oh yeah, like, I'm Fizzy, and this is Galaxy. Galaxy nodded. It was nice to meet you too, Miss Sparkle. The two young fillies walked away, whispering quietly to each other. Just as the ponies were beginning to tuck back into their breakfast, a pair of shrieks broke the silence from down the street. Oh my gosh, we just met Twilight Sparkle! Applejack shook her head, while Twilight gently laid hers down on the table. Fluttershy squeaked and snapped her wings in tightly. Oh, I remember, Pinkie Pie said suddenly. It was after the time we tried to make waffles in the bounce house. The ponies finished their meals in a hurry. Breakfast, largely forgotten after learning that Twilight's first match had been posted, they left some bits on the table and left, heading back toward the near gates where the schedules were posted. Pinkie Pie bounced excitedly down the sidewalk. Twilight, I knew it! I knew you'd do great, and you did do great! Above her, Fluttershy fluttered along, beaming.
This is so exciting. Do you know anything about your opponent?
Twilight Sparkle shook her head, and she hurried along as well. I don't know who this Shahnaz is, but it sounds like a Gaul's name. Other than that, I have no idea. Anyway, I'm trying to keep my hooves on the ground. My opponent can be just as good as a magician as I am. With a snort, Applejack looked over her shoulder at her friend. Twi, you haven't had your hooves on the ground all day since we left the cafe. Twilight was indeed flying all along, about a foot above the ground. Her butterfly wings were beating furiously, and she smiled awkwardly. Well, okay, maybe I am a little excited. About 2 hours later, Twilight found herself standing once again on the grass of the competition field. Since the previous day, the enormous field had been partitioned into a number of smaller fields, with covered bleachers on either side. The chalk rows had been swept away, replaced with a simple line across the center, dividing the rectangular field into 2 square halves. Twilight knew that in the adjacent fields other wizards were getting ready to compete as well, but she was more concerned with what was happening on this field. Twilight stood down at the far end of one half of the field, and she could see to her right a private box down in front. Toward the middle, Princess Luna and her friends were there, all of whom, Luna included, were already cheering for her. Pinkie Pie had gotten a giant foam hand from somewhere and was waving it wildly. Twilight smiled gratefully and waved back. At the other end of the field, her opponent, Shahnaz, was a gull, about Twilight's age, with a striking and well-tended brown and black fur. He wore a tasteful purple vest and a large ruby pendant around his neck. While Twilight was nervously looking for her friends and assessing her opponent, Shahnaz sat cross-legged on the ground, eyes closed, and a large number of gems of various colors and sizes arranged around him. Twilight couldn't see some sort of arcane significance from the gems, but could not immediately discern their purpose. A hush fell over the crowd, as directly between the two competitors, a burst of green energy flashed and faded, leaving behind the familiar green and red form of Nishtariot. She smiled winningly at the two crowds and bowed her head gracefully in the direction of Princess Luna, who returned the gesture stiffly and formally.
Good morning, and welcome to the first round of the young adult brackets.
The shape-shifting dragon's voice boomed, much like the rural Canterlot voice that Luna had, largely, broken the habit of using.
On this field, we have two highly placed competitors. To my left, Shahanaz, recently graduated from Ifrit Academy and widely considered to be the most promising young wizard in his class. He placed very well in yesterday's trials, and we expect great things from him here and in the future.
She turned and faced the young Gaul, who had risen to his feet and stood with his paws clasped behind his back.
We are honored to make your presence, sir.
The young Gaul bowed and replied, though Twilight couldn't hear what he said. A polite round of applause and cheers went through the crowd, with a small contingent of Gauls in the back boxes at the far end of the bleachers to Twilight's left cheering a bit more vigorously. Twilight clapped her hooves politely.
And to my right,
Nishtaria turned again, this time facing Twilight.
Twilight Sparkle, a student of Princess Celestia herself, bearer of the element of magic, and recent defender and hero of Equestria. She placed first in yesterday's trials of her bracket.
Her eyes narrowed, and she smiled thinly as she stared directly at Twilight.
We will be watching you closely as well, Twilight Sparkle.
The stadium exploded in cheering and applause, causing Twilight to flush in embarrassment. Even her opponent cheered. Roars of approval, applause, stomping, various cheers, and Twilight noted with a blush, even a voice telling her to marry it. She wished she could crawl under a rock and hide right now. Nishtaria walked to the right, stopping to the side and in front of Luna's private box.
Competitors, she roared. Come to the center.
Shahanaz stepped from his circle of stones and walked toward the center of the line, and Twilight did the same, her ear twitching. The Gaul spoke first. "Good morning, Twilight Sparkle," he said. His voice was unlike Aldaib's, smooth, with an educated Shottingham accent and just a faint exotic trace of the Gallic underneath. "I am honored to be competing with the savior of the world." He extended a paw. Twilight swallowed with a raised hoof timidly.
Good morning. Nice to meet you, too, but I'm really not—"
Shahanaz smiled, carefully keeping his pointy canine teeth covered. "You are too modest. The rumors don't do you the service you and your friends have done for all of us justice. I hope to learn much from you today." Shaking his paw awkwardly, Twilight tried and failed to smile in a way that didn't look like a rictus.
Good luck to you, too,"
she stammered. The two competitors returned to the opposite sides of the field, and Nishtaria stepped back to the center, this time facing the other bleachers.
Competition will begin on my mark. Competitors may use any spells at their disposal, but not any to physically harm or injure the opponent. The objective is to exhaust your opponent. When a competitor yields or can no longer cast, their opponent shall be declared the victor. If either competitor should refuse to compete, they shall be considered to be exhausted. If either competitor should cross the line into their opponent's territory, they shall forfeit the match. In addition, the Dragon Queen said, pointedly turning her face to Twilight, if I feel either competitor is not using their full abilities, I will reserve the right to declare the match forfeit. What did she mean by that? Twilight wondered. And why was Nishtaria looking at her so much? She was certainly going to compete to her full ability, but that's what she'd been doing since the beginning, right? The Dragon Queen stepped back from the center of the field, and her booming voice called out, "Begin!" Time seemed to slow down for Twilight, as from across the field, beams of blue energy lanced from a pair of large sapphires in the circle around Shahanaz, and on instinct that Twilight didn't even know she had, caused her to fly straight up
and away from the beams. You could feel them pass her by, sweeping slowly up after her, not physically cold, but enervating even at a distance. These spells were made to drain Twilight's energy. They would end the match before it even began. Twilight retaliated, swooping up, then around toward the center line of the field in a graceful arc, her horn glowing purple as she approached. One of the sapphires glowed a matching purple and spun, its beam swinging around toward Shahanaz. The beams died as the gold dropped the spell. Twilight dropped to the ground on all four hooves, causing her telekinesis to wrestle the gem around, keeping Shahanaz from re-establishing his spell. Instead of fighting Twilight's telekinesis, however, the gem at Shahanaz's throat and a large ruby next to him thrummed with energy. Twilight could feel the ground rumble at her hooves. She flew up, dropping the sapphire, just as a huge root tore its way free from the ground, snapping up in an attempt to entangle Twilight. The root thrashed around, trying to wrap around the flying unicorn's hooves. Swooping away, Twilight came back with another arc, lowering her horn and flying directly at the thick root. She tore across the root with her horn, and swept down to the ground as the root, afflicted with Twilight's powerful banishment, fell heavily to the earth. Shahanaz's gems began glowing in quick succession. A telekinetic push here, a small localized earthquake there, even an increase in gravity that kept Twilight from flying away. The purple unicorn batted each spell away, dispelling them and shielding herself. Ultimately, none of Shahanaz's spells even managed to rustle her mane. Twilight panted, swallowing hard after dispelling the gravity increase, and then she understood the trap that she had wandered into. Shahanaz wasn't trying to hurt her. That was against the rules. Other than the drain spell, his spells on their own would shake her up, but not much. However, while he was using simple earth magic that he could cast easily, Twilight was using shield spells and banishments, and those were draining. Not to mention she was flying around to evade his attacks, and those were just as tiring. He was letting her exhaust herself. Twilight relaxed as the large ruby thrummed once again, and this time, a stone hand had reached from the ground and grabbed her. The hand shook her unnervingly, and Twilight carefully kept calm instead of dispelling the hand in a panic. Instead, she shakily gathered her thoughts and cast something she knew very well and could cast very easily: a come-to-life spell. The hand suddenly opened, dropping Twilight, and she grinned as she shook the dust from her mane. Her hypothesis had been correct. The spell that Shahanaz was using through the ruby focus was a form of object enchantment, and most object enchantments didn't work on things that were already living, animated things, like, for example, the subject of a come-to-life spell. The giant stone hand tore itself free from the ground, landing on its fingers as if it was some kind of giant spider, and began scuttling over toward Shahanaz. In a panic, the gull quickly recognized a few gems and began channeling energy through them. A powerful gust of wind blew the gems away from him before he was able to ignite them. Shahanaz bolted away from the spot he had been sitting as the giant hand thing stomped up to him, and the gull began to run away. The gem on his neck started to glow as he began to cast what Twilight recognized as a banishment spell. She was confused by this. Much as he had been at the trials of the previous day, why did other magicians seem to find banishing so difficult? Shahanaz succeeded in his banishment spell, and, with a sound like a wall collapsing, the stone hand collapsed into rubble. The gull, breathing heavily, lopped back to his gems, his pendant glowing as the gems rearranged themselves back into a circle. Twilight reached out with her telekinesis but was rebuffed, the gems ringing with a crystal tone as she failed to get her hold on any of them. She flew back, quickly putting as much room as possible between her and Shahanaz. All of a sudden, the ground beneath Twilight exploded with life. the grass beneath her growing almost instantly into a morass of long grass stalks much taller than her, a living picket. She swooped up and forward to the front edge of her side of the field, as the innervating blue beams came after her again. A blue door with frame suddenly appeared in front of Hashanaz and his gems, blocking his sight of Twilight and the beams of blue energy. Twilight laughed. She had used this silly door summoning spell mostly to make a point when Spike was absently insisting she do something, but she never thought it would have any practical use before. There was a beat, then the door opened from the inside, and the beams traced back out. It was too late. The beams were still searching for where Twilight had been, not where she was. In the short moment that the door had been shut, the unicorn had flown up and to the side, near the bleachers, and prepared a spell. A meandering row of musical notes swept out from Twilight's horn, and right through the open door. Shahanaz was unprepared for this. The magical music seeped easily in through the ears and into his mind. He yawned and sat back on his rump, fighting unsuccessfully to stay awake. After wavering a moment, he lay down with a loud snore, the blue beams dying away and the grass on Twilight's side of the field returning to normal. Twilight settled back down on the ground. Nistariot looked over the field with an unreadable expression, then walked out to the center. "Well done," she said to the unicorn in a soft, neutral voice. She turned to face the crowd and announced like a crack of thunder, "The match is over, and Twilight Sparkle is our victor."